Welcome, Traceable Designers. Today we're making the beautiful dual fabric pleated straight style no-sew valance. This valance features front and back fabric, pleated side panels, and pleated center connector. You'll need your straight design form from your Traceable Designer kit. To begin, we need to size our fabric. We have an upper section that is set for 8 inches. I'm going to make the depth of my valance side panel 10 inches, so we have to add a little height to the upper area for our rod pocket. So I'm going to measure down about 4.5 inches across and just mark that off so I know the positioning line for the top edge of my design form. And then to make about a 16 to 18 inch wide side panel, we need to add a little bit of width to our fabric. So I'm measuring over about 12 inches and marking that along. This is going to give me my placement line for tracing my straight style form. You don't have to add that much width, but in this case, I'd like this completed valance to be 18 inches wide, keeping in mind that the side return will take up about 2.5 to 3 inches of the width. So position the design form along your marks on the upper section and the lower section, and then just trace around the inside area around the edge. And then, because this is a pretty wide piece of fabric, you'll need to slide it over, and if you do slide your fabric or move it, make sure you reposition your design form along your traced line so it's nice and straight, and then continue on the inside and then on the outside edge. You can add additional width if needed to the upper section. You would do that now just by simply sliding your form over to the right to add the added width. So slide that up to the top, make sure it's nice and straight, and then complete tracing across the edge so that you've marked off the rod area. Then use the design form to trace across from your original mark to the outside edge. Then simply follow the trace line to cut out your panel. You are going to make a contrasting fabric to connect with this panel, which will be the back side. So when you trace that, you just reverse everything. You trace with the design form positioned upside down so that when you put the two right sides together, they will match up. Just remember to add the exact same amount of depth and width when you're cutting your second panel. Once both panels are completed, you'll put the right sides together. One of them is going to be a little bit bigger than the other one, so you want to take the one that is a little bit smaller, and that will be the panel that you use to attach your fusible backing to create your seams. You want to make sure that you aren't overlapping glue onto your ironing board. So cut 1/2 inch strips of fusible backing and then simply follow along the outside edge, fusing down your backing to all of the edges. You'll leave the upper area completely free of any fusible backing. That's what you're going to use to turn this inside out or right side out. So you'll do the straight sides first, you'll do the large outside edge, then you'll do the shorter inside edge, and then across the lower section, and then down your V to the bottom. Make sure you overlap the sections. These are all 1/2 inch, so they're going to match up. And then when you get down to the curve, you just stop short of the curve. Finish along the bottom doing the same thing, stopping short of the curve. After we're finished with that, we're going to create a curved piece of fusible backing for the inside corner. So pull out a piece of fusible backing, and then you'll just get your design form. You can see that the design form lines up perfectly on the edge. So you're going to use that to create your section that gets attached to the curved side. So you'll position that over top of the fusible backing and then just trace around the edge, and then just raise it that 1/2 inch that's needed, and then just trace again. And then when you're finished with that, you'll cut out your curved section, and that'll fit perfectly on top of the straight pieces in the corner of your panel. So just position that where needed and fuse that down, and then you're completely finished with adding your backing. You're going to let that 100% cool before you attempt to peel it off, so you make sure that it comes off evenly. Then just peel off all of your paper. Make sure you get every bit of it off. Sometimes a little bit is left behind. And especially when you get to the sections where you overlapped the paper, you really want to double check that and make sure that you aren't aggressively peeling it off and removing the glue. So once that is completely removed, you're going to put your fabric sections together again. Remember that they'll match up as long as the insides are together. So align that and make sure this part is very straight before you start ironing. You can play with the fabric a little bit to get it all straightened out. Make sure that's positioned perfectly. And then you're going to start and in the corner area and sweep out toward the sides. Keep checking to make sure that it's lined up properly. The idea is to make this nice and flat so that you can get your edges thoroughly fused. So start in the center, sweep out toward the sides. Once you get everything positioned where you need it, you'll go back over your edges and make sure those are extremely well fused, because you don't want this panel to come apart when you turn it inside out. So just keep going over it until it's completely secured. And I'm ironing across the center to flatten out my fabric. I don't want it buckling, so this is part of the process. So you can see when you turn it over, you can see where the glue lines are because that has fused together, and our upper section is completely open. So just keep going over it until it's finished. Once everything's cooled, you're going to snip the corners. So this rounded area here will need to be snipped without going all the way up to the edge of the glue. You want to stay inside. You don't want to cut all the way through the glue. You want to make sure that you fall short of that. So do 4 or 5 little snips there. That'll make that curve evenly. And then on the inside corner as well. Few little snips. Make sure you don't overcut, because if you cut into your valance, you will have a hole, and you're not putting trim on this, so you want to make sure that you don't over snip that. Okay, make sure your glue is 100% cooled. You don't even want it a little bit warm before you turn this inside out. You need it 100% cool to stick together. So you'll just carefully turn your panel inside out and then just run your finger along the corners and make sure that you've straightened out and pressed the corners and the edges out. And then once you get that the way you like it, with everything nice and even, again, you'll start on the side, the long side, and fuse down, and then along the edges, sweeping in and up. What you're trying to do here is flatten the edges and flatten out the connections so that that is straight on the front and back. On the inside, where you see that it's pulling a little bit, you did snip that, so you just work with that a little bit at a time with the iron, and that'll eventually just straighten out and be nice and flat. So you'll just work there, again, fixing your edges and all around the edges and out toward the side. Since the upper section isn't sealed, it'll be a lot easier to get everything nice and flat. To make your pleats, position the completed iron together panel with the long side facing you, and then I'm going to make sure that I have about 3.5 inches for a side return that's going to wrap around my side of each side of my valance rod. So just fold that over to make your first pleat. Double check that from the pleated edge over to the edge and make sure you have about 3.5 inches. And then make sure everything's nice and straight and just fuse that down. You want to flatten that out. Then pull out your extra long fabric pins and just pin that to secure it. You will do this a few times. You'll keep looking at it and making sure that it's the way you want it to be. And then once we have all of our pleats in place, you'll hold it up to your rod and make sure you like what you have before you finish securing everything together. So I have my first section ironed down, and then I'm going to pull the fabric over and make my second pleat. So what we're doing is we're moving toward where we can see the back side when we fold the pleat over, and we're giving some width to our panel. So we're going to do a variety of pleats. This second pleat is going to move over about 2 inches from the edge to the curved side on this upper area, leaving about 1 inch underneath where you're going to position your heat and bond to hold that together. Carry on by fusing down and pinning, the same process all the way down your panel. So now we have the area that's going to go around our rod, and we have our pleats. Now I'm at the area where I'm pulling over so I can start to see the pink on the back. So this is really a matter of preference, how large you'd like your pleats to be. So when you get to the area where the pink or the back side is showing, you can see I'm pulling that over as far as possible. Now there's not a lot of distance between my pleats because I'm actually exposing the back side of this fabric. So after I get that completely positioned, you just fuse that down and make sure everything's nice and flat. Again, pinning everything. Then just cut sections of fusible backing and then insert those inside of your pleats. You want to make sure that those are hidden 100% underneath so you don't have glue showing. You can also make longer strips going almost to the bottom of your valance. It's really a matter of personal preference if you'd like those to be glued together at the bottom or not. Once the paper's cool, just simply peel back and remove the paper, and then just start fusing down each one of your pleats. Do them one at a time to make sure that you don't have exposed glue, so as you go along you're going to take a while to get these to fuse. You do have quite a bit of thick fabric, especially as you carry along, so you want to make sure that you get those completely fused down and then wait for those to cool before you actually move your valance. When you get to the end and you're placing your fusible backing on the back side, you want to make sure that you don't extend beyond the curve, otherwise you will actually see the glue once that section is folded over. It's also a good idea to use a spare piece of lining when you're fusing your pleats so that you don't burn your fabric. So trim off the top edge just to get rid of the excess, and then repeat the process on the back, positioning your fusible backing inside of the creases, and then fuse that down, and then wait for everything to be nice and cool before you move on to your rod pocket. Okay, let's make a rod pocket. We want our top section to be 10 inches deep from the rod down, so I'm marking down that 4.5 inches or 4 inches at this point all the way across, and then fold your fabric over and then begin the fusing process by simply ironing that down to make a crease. Cut a piece of fusible backing to fit inside. You don't want to overextend onto the back of the lining there, so you're just going to make sure that fits perfectly, and then iron your fusible backing on the back side to make your pocket. Once that's completely cooled, you can peel that off, and then making this pocket is going to be a little bit more difficult because the fabric is so thick. So pull your lining up so that's nice and straight before you fold that over, and this will just take a while. You heat the back of the pocket to fold that down, and then just keep holding the iron on top until that fuses in place. For this process, you will need to add quite a bit of heat and press on your iron to get that heat to go through and fuse that rod pocket in place. It does take a while, and you may want to cover it with a spare piece of lining to avoid burning the fabric, but just take your time. Eventually it will secure. Once you've finished both of your side panels, it's time to move on to your connector panel. Now this panel is made the same way with the fabric right sides together. You can make this any width, keeping in mind that your pleats on both outside edges will be a total of about 6 per side or 8 per side. So once you've figured that, take 16 off of your width, and then just figure your center panel or your connector panel width that's going to be needed for your window. So use the design form to trace and cut off the edges. I used the V shape on the sides, and then follow the same process. Take the smaller of the two panels and attach your fusible backing all the way around the edges. Now for this, when you're finished, before you turn it, you're just going to snip the points at the bottom. You just snip those across so they're flat instead of pointed. So you'll finish around all the edges, and then you're going to put a little strip on the upper section, leaving room for you to put your hand through the middle, because we will be sealing off the top section for this connector panel. So peel off your paper once everything is 100% cooled, and then again the right sides together. I have a solid color so it can go either direction really. And then starting in the center, sweeping out toward the sides, make sure that's nice and flat, and then make sure all of your seams are 100% sealed. Before you turn that inside out, make sure it's cool, and then put your hand inside and just straighten out all of your edges. So you'll push the corners and make sure those are straight, and then this will get ironed down and secured. So starting in the middle, as you did before, moving out toward the side, just fuse that down, hold off on the top section until you're completely finished so you make sure it's nice and flat. Then cut a piece of fusible backing to stick inside. So you'll just put that inside, fuse that down, and then you'll peel that paper off and then use that to close the entire panel. Now you can put an entire section of fusible backing across the middle of this before you turn it. That'll make it nice and stiff and flat. By just sealing the edges like this section, it will be a little bit looser. Again, you can make this panel any width needed. It's really personal preference. And when you're doing your folds, this is really up to you how much fold you would like to have. I'm just going to do a small one because I made a small panel. So I'm just folding mine over and measuring about 4 inches on each side and then folding that back. And you'll follow the same process, just iron that down so that that's nice and straight, and then fold over the way you like it, and then just fuse that down. Insert your fusible backing, and then you'll just secure that. Now again, when you're putting your fusible backing on your connector panel, when you get to the part on the front where there is a V and the back is exposed, you want to make sure that you don't go below the area that's going to be exposed. Otherwise, you'll wind up with glue on the front. So add all your fusible backing, let that cool completely, and then you'll just peel that off. So you can see here, you have to clip the bottom to make sure that doesn't show through. Once cooled, remove all your fusible backing and then just measure to make sure it's nice and straight, and then just iron everything in place. Okay, to prepare your connector panel for hanging, I'm measuring down 10 inches, so it's the same depth as my side panels, and then just put a little mark across there. We're going to add some fusible fabric backing, about a 1/2 inch strip. You want to put that on the top section of your connector and just iron that in place. Once that's cooled, remove the paper and position the soft side of a 1/2 inch strip of fusible backing right on top. Peel the paper off, and then once that secures to the back of that exposed glue, that's going to stick really, really well. So you want to put that one across the top, and then where this is going to fold over, you can make it fold over any depth that you'd like. You're going to need to put a strip or two in the center, so you'll do the same process. You'll cut a 1/2 inch strip of fusible backing, and then you'll put the hard side of the fusible backing on top of that, so that will be the receiving Velcro for when you fold that over. And again, that can be any length or any depth that you'd like it to be, and depending upon how wide your connector panel is, you may need to do a few strips across and a few strips in the center to make sure that holds really well when that folds over the rod. Okay, we're ready to hang our beautiful new valance. So simply slip your side panels on your rod, and then you're going to position your connector panel in the center between your two side panels, and then just fold that over and secure it over your side panels. And your beautiful new pleated straight style swag valance will be ready to hang. Thank you for joining me, Traceable Designers, and remember, you can always make your mark with Traceable Designer.